Today, we are going to solve the problem of tension in your playing. Playing with less tension can help you sound better, it can help you play faster, and it can help you not get injured. So it's super important to solve, but it kind of eludes us how to actually work on it. I remember a teacher in school told me, "Rob, you play marimba with too much tension. It doesn't sound good when your actual stick hits the actual bar of the marimba." And I said, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And the answer was relax, just relax. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but having somebody say relax to you is kind of maddening because you're like, okay, I'm telling myself to relax, like you're playing the instrument, but the right thing isn't happening. And so it was always kind of impossible for me to understand, what do I do about tension? How do I deal with it? How do I play with less tension? So that's what you're going to learn in this video, how to become a musician who plays with the least possible tension at all times. So first, let me just demonstrate for you quickly how playing with less tension can solve each of those problems. When you're playing with too much tension, the vibrations of your instrument are limited, right? So this is applicable whether you're playing a percussion instrument or strings or woodwinds or anything really. If there's a place where your muscles are using too much tension, then the sound that wants to be vibrating, or the instrument or the parts of your instrument that want to be vibrating, that would be vibrating, are limited because you are somehow pressing down on the instrument. So on percussion, for instance, if you're trying to make a great sound like this, but you're holding tightly onto the stick and you're not letting it bounce back up into the air, or you're not letting the stick itself vibrate freely, then you're going to sound like this. With tension, without tension. With tension, without tension. With tension, without tension. Sounds different. That's why almost all the time we want to find the minimum viable pressure to use, or minimum viable tension to use, when we're choosing how to play any given note. MVP, minimum viable pressure, that is a concept by Nathan Cole in the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Check out his video on tension if you have a second. The second problem is that you can't play as fast. So you'll have to figure out how to apply this to your instrument if you're not a percussionist. But for a percussionist, if you're holding down on the stick and you play a note, then the stick itself is not going to give you the full rebound that it naturally would have wanted to give you based on the physics of the initial momentum, right? If you play this note, then the stick wants to bounce back to here, but you're holding down on the stick so it doesn't move as much. You're actually sucking up some of the energy that the stick would have used to fly through the air. Because of that, you have to make up for the movement that the stick itself didn't do. You have to actually move all the way with the stick, rather than let the stick do the work for you. So here's what it looks like without tension, and here's what it looks like with tension. I'm just working harder to make the notes happen at all when I have tension in my playing, so naturally I can't go as fast if I'm doing more of the work. The less tension I put into the sticks, the less work that I have to do to make the same kind of motions and movement, which means the faster I can go, naturally. And finally, tension is something that can lead to injury. You know, repetition, tension, all of those things can lead to repetitive stress. Obviously, the more tension you place on your muscles and the more you make them work harder, the harder it is to stay healthy over the years. I'm not a medical expert at all, but whenever I hear injury experts talk about playing and practicing, they talk about doing less repetitions, but they also talk about playing with less tension, playing with less pressure, being as free as possible in your playing. So longevity, you're going to need to play with less tension. Cool. If you are interested in learning a structured, organized, systematic approach to preparing for auditions, instead of it just feeling like chaos a little bit, you can go check out the audition cheat sheet. This is a 5-step detailed process that I lay out. It's how I prepared for my audition in the Met Orchestra, which happened in this room. And it's also how a whole bunch of my students have prepared for auditions and advanced, got into finals, and won their jobs in various orchestras around the world. You can download the audition cheat sheet for free. It's at robknopper.com/audition cheat sheet. So let's talk about how to fix this problem. So it can be tempting to go to the practice room and say, okay, I just need to play relaxed. And then you play and you tell yourself, relax, relax, and then nothing happens. And it's a little bit hard because the problem is it's easy to think that you should play with no tension or completely relax. Like that's the idea. And that's because in pedagogy, we're usually playing with too much tension, so our teachers tell us to play with less. And it's actually a fallacy. You shouldn't play with no tension. You can't play with no tension. You can't play completely relaxed. You can play very relaxed, but it requires tension to play any note. Like on the snare drum, we have a bunch of different kinds of notes. We have singles, we have doubles, we have buzzes, and we have different dynamics. And each of those different stroke types requires a certain amount of tension. Look, I can play singles with a very, very low amount of tension. But if I try to play buzz strokes with that amount of tension, nothing comes out. It's not a buzz. I actually have to add tension in order to make a roll sound good. Listen to that. I have to add tension to sound good. That is the truth. You have to play with a certain amount of tension to make any note. So yes, usually we are playing with too much tension, and there's a smaller amount of tension that we should be playing with, but it's not zero. And the thing is, different notes, different types of strokes, different, think about your instrument, different ways of producing sound require different amounts of tension. There's a perfect amount of tension that is required for any given kind of note, and it's up to you to find it, right? What is the minimum viable pressure for this note, for that note? The other problem with tension is that it causes so many problems in the audition room. Like for me, this happens. I go into the audition, I'm holding onto the sticks, and maybe I'm supposed to play something that requires a low amount of tension. But all of a sudden, I'm gripping the sticks, like I'm absolutely white-knuckling the sticks until I start to shake. And it's because I'm scared of releasing tension. Like I look at my hands and I say, please release, please relax. I'll give anything if you just relax. And it's like I don't have confidence, though, in how much to relax. I feel like if I relax at all, I'm going to relax too much, and then I'm going to drop the stick or something like that. The skill I need isn't just to loosen up, it's to loosen up to an exact, precise amount. And the problem is that I'm not ready to loosen up. I don't actually know how to get there, because in the practice room, a lot of the time people didn't practice adjusting tension. They just practiced playing relaxed. I mean, that's a first important step. If you just practiced playing as relaxed as possible for any given note, that's great. But if you are playing with too much tension and you don't know how to transition to that exact right amount of tension, then your work didn't matter because you can't access it, right? So you also have to practice a second thing, which is to transition to the right amount of tension from the wrong amount of tension. So you need to have the skill of walking into a room, feeling too much tension, and then relaxing to the right amount of tension. That's the skill you actually need in an audition. So how do you practice this? Okay, I want you to think about it in 3 separate exercises. The first exercise is simply exploring the spectrum of tension. I want you to become a master of not just the right amount of tension, but of all points along this entire spectrum of tension, right? So you can play a given note with way, 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 way too much tension, or way, 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 way too little tension, right? There is a huge spectrum of where you can play a note. So choose a note, or choose a passage, a grouping of notes, whatever. Choose something that works for you. I work on one note at a time when I'm doing this, and I just repeat it. So say I'm working on, a buzz, for instance. What I'll do is I'll start on one extreme of the spectrum of how much tension I'm going to use. So I'll start with so much tension that it's ridiculous. And I'll just start repeating until I can sort of make that sound as good as possible, even though it's wrong. As I get good at each point along the spectrum, then I'll move 1 point down, 1 point down, 1 point down, 1 point down, until I kind of cover every single notch on the ruler, or every single, notch on the knob, not a volume knob, but the tension knob as I kind of turn it. Eventually, I'll get all the way to the very, very bare minimum amount of tension that I can possibly use before I say drop the stick or before the wrong kind of note comes out. For me, when I'm playing a buzz with too little tension, then actually I start playing too few bounces in a buzz and it starts becoming a double. I mean, a double is not an incorrect note, but if you're trying to play a buzz, then it's not right, obviously. So this is really good. At this point, you have explored the full spectrum of tension, right? You are becoming a virtuoso of tension. Instead of just thinking of tension as this scary thing that your teachers yell at you about and you don't know how to manipulate, it is starting to become part of who you are as a musician. If you have the ability to explore all the way through the spectrum of dynamic, from triple P to triple F and everywhere in between, you should also have this skill of exploring through the entirety of the spectrum of tension from high to low. Okay, the second way to work on this is as you're learning each note, you should work on exactly what that note should be in terms of tension. So if you're just learning notes and you're kind of sight reading through a line and then you sight read through it again and then you sight read through it again, it will get better. But the problem is the sight reading version of how you play each note may not be the ideal amount of tension. It's not going to be the exact way in your vision it could ideally come out. It's just going to be what you naturally do from your sight reading version. So when I'm learning music, I learn notes really one note at a time. And as I'm sort of repeating each note, it's kind of like a camera lens. If you've ever manipulated a camera lens and tried to focus it, it's like it's out of focus one way and you're turning it a little bit and it comes into focus and then suddenly you turn it too far and it's out of focus. And then you turn it back and you keep going slightly back and forth until boom, you have it exactly in focus and you trust it and then you can move on. So I do that, but in terms of exactly how I want the note to sound. I mean, I try to make everything about the note how I want it to sound. I'm focusing in on exactly the dynamic, the placement, my grip, everything about the note, but also tension. I'm choosing exactly how much tension I want that note to have as a part of its basic characteristics. So when I play from note to note to note, what happens is each one maybe has its own ideal amount of tension, and I have to learn what that is. So if I'm going from a loud note to a soft note, or if I'm going from a buzz to a single, I know that I'm going from this point on the spectrum of tension to that point. So that was the second thing that you should work on, is when you're learning notes, choose how much tension each note should ideally have. But then you need to work on the third thing. The third thing is to literally work on the actual transition of tension. So if note 1 is supposed to have 70% tension in order to make it sound awesome, and note 2 is supposed to have 20% tension to make it sound beautiful and amazing, you can't just trust that it's going to work. I mean, transitioning between how to play that first note and how to play that second note, especially in terms of tension, is going to be a project of its own, right? The transition between two notes is the third event of those two notes. There's the first note, there's the second note, and the transition between the notes. So you can actually work on this transition, and here's the exercise. So play the first note, and you even could repeat it as many times as you need to make it sound exactly like you want it. And then play a fermata over a rest. And in that fermata over a rest is the moment when you physically adjust the amount of tension in your grip, in your bow, in your embouchure, wherever it is. And then Play the second note and repeat it as many times as you need to lock in exactly to the right amount of tension. Keep doing this over and over, and what you'll find is that, first of all, the number of times you have to play the first note in order to lock into the right amount of tension gets less and less and less and less until you can immediately get to it without having to repeat it. Second is the amount of time it takes you during the in-between the notes moment, the fermata moment, to transition between the high tension to the low tension or whatever it is, gets less and less and less and less until it happens immediately. And then the third thing is that the second note becomes quicker to get to the right tension. Eventually, you can take out the rest in the middle and just play from the first to the second note exactly in choreography, exactly transitioning from the perfect amount of tension in the first to the second note. So that is how I work on tension, and that is how you can improve your relationship with tension and solve this problem of tension in your playing. I am inspired to think about how much better you are going to get once you solve the problem of tension, so you can have better sound, you can play faster, and most importantly of all, maybe not get injured in your lifetime. That would be great. All right, don't forget to download the audition cheat sheet, which is my 5-step process for preparing for auditions. It's applicable for any instrument. You can download it at robknopper.com/audition cheat sheet. I'm curious though, I think it'd be cool to kind of collect some ideas on how to work on tension. I'm sure that you have experienced tension, or maybe you have actually solved the problem of tension in different ways than I just mentioned. If you have other strategies or other exercises that have worked for you to deal with tension, go ahead and share them in the comments below. It might help some of our other viewers to just get more ideas on how to work on tension. All right, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for future audition prep and percussion related videos, and I'll see you in the next video.